here to present, about AI-powered codeless test automation. So, let's get right to it. Right, we have a short time, and I'll go through, kind of how testing plays a critical role within the journey to DevOps and continuous integration, right? And as part of that, I'll also kind of give you a quick sneak peek into the tool itself, so that you can kind of see how ACCELQ enables that journey. But more so, let's kind of start out by taking a little step back and kind of looking at, what does it really take and how testing plays a role within that, and kind of what are some of the common myths and misconceptions which hold back a lot of organizations in kind of achieving that maturity. We heard a lot of good things about release automation, and kind of a lot of critical aspects of to the journey to DevOps. But obviously, testing, at the end of the day, if you think about it, really, it's kind of all about automation, right? Regardless of what process area we're talking about. So in testing, it kind of translates to the same. But where I would really like to start is kind of an interesting story that'll help us relate to kind of what core challenges which we face, right? And then potentially we all kind of have a better mindset to kind of approach those challenges, right? Tools obviously play a part in it, but if you're looking at my screen, right, and I don't know if you kind of heard about this cargo cult belief that kind of came around the Second World War time, I believe around, late 18th century, middle of 19th century, right? There are multiple times when this kind of started taking off, right? Primarily, I think it originated in the Polynesian Islands, I think primarily in Melanesia, right? And if you're looking at some of the pictures, images on the screen, right, what happened was these islands obviously had, groups of people who kind of were not as technologically advanced as kind of the rest of the world, especially in the wartime, kind of, with advancements in fighter airplanes and all of that, right? Armies were building kind of bases in different islands, right, to continue the war. And as part of that, as army bases would create, these bases around these islands, what happened was they would drop off a whole lot of cargoes, including food and different kind of gadgets and stuff, right? And the people were obviously fascinated by how they would get airdrops, right, of cargo, and they would think, the gods are sending kind of them the goodies and the good stuff, right? And to basically, obviously, when the war ended, right, all of that stopped, and people were wondering, all right, what do we do next, right? How do we get these things back? They had no idea what was going on around the world, right? So they started kind of mocking and mimicking things, and they believed if they kept doing that, right, the cargoes would come back, and all those things which came along would start coming back. And basically they stopped doing kind of their own things, and they sacrificed kind of the animals, the farming, and a lot of things, right, just to basically mock. And the reason I kind of bring that story, as it compares to kind of testing and automation, especially in quality assurance, is a lot of times we kind of think what our process area needs, and we try to put these pieces together, kind of almost mocking automation in a way that we think will help us achieve kind of DevOps, right? Or the journey towards DevOps. But in reality, right, we are not really solving kind of the core challenges and kind of really advancing that technology, right, to cope up with it, right? And how I relate this back to automation is, basically, automation's nothing new, right? UI automation's been around for at least 2 decades, right? I personally come from Mercury. At one point we had the highest market capture. We were the first ones to kind of do record and playback based scriptless automation, right? Back 20 years back, right? But obviously, as with digital transformation and kind of, DevOps becoming more mainstream in terms of software development processes and stuff, right? The application stack has changed. Our technology is a lot more dynamic. And specifically when it comes to Salesforce, right, it's probably one of the most dynamic applications, and you can kind of understand why, right? It has, it's not just sales service, community cloud, financial services, health cloud, nCino's or the ecosystem of its agility, right? But it's also the ability to how it can easily be configured. The same sales cloud, as simple as it sounds, is no longer just a CRM. It can be configured to do, ticket violation. The other day we had a government customer, who does complete ticket violation ticketing and vaccine registration through the Salesforce Sales Cloud, right? And what have you, right? We have financial services customers heavily dependent on kind of, whether it be financial services cloud or nCino or Velocities of the world and so on, right? And that dynamic nature of configured application, makes it all the more challenging. So your traditional technology, right, no matter how much you mock, right, in terms of being able to automate that, it's just not going to work, right? And if you think of the other end of the spectrum, right, which is kind of these, the open source framework of the world, which has caught on so much attention in the last 5 to 8 years, right? Which makes sense because a lot of traditional tools weren't able to catch up and give the power and flexibility to catch up with the dynamic applications, as well as kind of the changing software development lifecycle. But that doesn't mean, we have a low code, no code app, which should be tested with tons of lines of code and programming frameworks and custom frameworks and needing to almost hire an army of developers, right? That also just doesn't add up. It's not scalable. It's not the solution, right? A lot of times there are misconceptions that if I do more unit testing, programming based unit testing, that'll kind of bring automation. Yes, that's necessary. You want to release a product that's higher in quality, right? But you cannot compromise on your end-to-end validation, especially more so now when it's API, mobile, UI, what have you, right? So, the bottom line being, you need something which is kind of best of the two worlds, right? Which is scriptless in nature, but still allows you to kind of, do that automation much earlier in the life cycle, right? Because if you're looking at kind of, my screen, right? If you see, automation lag is completely anti-agile. And if I'm anti-agile in terms of my testing and validation, no matter how hard I try for all the other process areas, testing's gonna drag me down, right? It's gonna hold me back to achieve that release velocity to really get me to that DevOps stage, right? And typically how testing and automation has been traditionally looked at is more from a regression standpoint, right? But again, at the end of the day, if I want multiple releases, I need to have automation and validation kind of embedded as part of my core life cycle, right? So that's kind of where ACCELQ comes in, right? We've taken a completely fresh approach to automation compared to kind of the traditional vendors out there. So to give you an idea, if you've not heard of ACCELQ, in our first assessment across the board, right, pretty much all analysts have analyzed us as leaders in this space. We are a cloud-based automation platform. In fact, the latest Forrester report that came out on continuous test automation, specifically calls out our partnership with Salesforce and our competency around Salesforce ecosystem, right? But we are an enterprise platform, and that's one of the core reasons why ACCELQ kind of got selected even by Salesforce's Technology Innovation Board internally, right? And we are on App Exchange kind of pretty close in terms of how we integrate with Salesforce, its ongoing releases and so on, right? Which I'll cover in the next 20 minutes or so, right? But coming back to kind of how we approach that challenge that kind of I laid out from a test automation standpoint, right? I'll kind of at least try to touch on the breadth of the product capabilities, taking you through kind of, how the design automation, how the core aspect of actually codeless AI-based test automation works, right? So that it can really bring in kind of that automation early in the life cycle, right? Enable Salesforce releases, ongoing releases to be validated in a more streamlined fashion. How ACCELQ kind of, leverages AI-based concepts to again bring in kind of some change impact capabilities like self-healing and so, right? One of the core challenges with an application like Salesforce is, obviously, as we all know, they do 3 releases a year, right? Spring, summer, and winter release. But if you really think about it, it just doesn't stop there, right? If you think about it, Salesforce as an application never lives in a silo, right? It upstream and downstream, the business processes need to be integrated with lots of different applications, including kind of financial applications to other ERP applications to certain APIs and databases, custom integrations, and so on, right? So if you couple those 3 releases with all these other application release schedules, if you really think about it, you need something robust, you need something sustainable, which you can almost have a reliable execution, automated execution suite, which can be kind of run on an ongoing basis for every time there is a change, whether it be Salesforce specific release change or whether it be in the ecosystem of its integrations within your implementation, right? So that change maintenance and that AI based self-healing kind of becomes really critical in terms of being able to identify these changes, right, to cope up with its own releases as well as the releases with integrated applications, right? And then we've already talked so much about kind of being part of that CI/CD pipeline. That is really critical, but make no mistake, that's not your starting point, right? That's something which you kind of really want to achieve, but you got to get your 101s right in terms of having that solid base regression suite, and then integrating with a tool like Flowsum, which can kind of seamlessly initiate automated execution suite as part of that release process. So going from one environment to other environment, having an automated play in terms of executing and initiating a regression suite, coming back with a go no go decision based on kind of how the suite ran, right? So that's kind of the breadth of the tool what ACCELQ plays in, right? And let's kind of look at the tool itself so that you kind of get a quick view into how the tool kind of approaches all these different process areas. Before I jump to the tool, let me cover one more quick aspect, right, in terms of the technology stack, right? So one of the critical things, like I was saying in Salesforce is its integrations, right? So the way ACCELQ kind of approaches automation is pretty technology agnostic, right? So the platform itself has multiple, product lines within the ACCELQ umbrella, right? So if you're looking at kind of the technology stack on the right of my screen, right, you'll see that there are multiple product lines kind of handling different technology stacks, right? So maybe web technologies, right, maybe other ERP platforms other than Salesforce, or it may be completely non-UI based API validations, including kind of even custom protocols for healthcare and financial services, as well as kind of enterprise service bus validations, right? Regardless of whether they are done within the Salesforce suite or independent test, right? But more so kind of in terms of an end-to-end Salesforce standpoint, right? ACCELQ also supports kind of non-UI automation, may it be really legacy green screen mainframe automation, or it could be kind of your Oracle EBS Java forms of the world, right, which are kind of still pretty existent and integrated into a lot of Salesforce implementations we see out there in terms of maybe financial ERP applications or what have you, right, as well as complete kind of backend automation support, right? And within Salesforce ecosystem, ACCELQ kind of handles the regular kind of sales service community and those clouds, obviously, right? But it also has kind of core partnerships with Velocity, which is now obviously Salesforce Ventures, right? Business, so Salesforce Business, right? As well as kind of nCino's and Salesforce CPQs of the world, right? So in fact, nCino is an ISV partner to ACCELQ as well, right? So one of the unique things what we've done in all these partnerships with Salesforce and Velocity and nCino's of the world is created a pre-existing kind of universes, right? So that apart from kind of the tool bringing efficiency, there is also a clear value add in terms of a pre-existing set of recommended business processes and tests that should be run as part of bringing an automation objective to the overall DevOps journey, right? So that's something which we look at in the tool as well, right? So let's jump over at this time, right? And then I'm going to come back to this really critical aspect, I kind of touched on early, which is keeping up kind of with Salesforce releases, right? And we know how Salesforce kind of can get peculiar, so to say, when it comes to new releases, right? May it be, when Horror components were released, or adding on and making changes to kind of their Lightning Web components. And in the last session, we talked about kind of a new generation of managed packages, right? And implementations which kind of get more complex with managed package, which are added on for your custom business solutions, right? So how ACCELQ kind of approaches that. ACCELQ again has a kind of a completely different approach in terms of kind of how to keep up with those releases. It's called ACCELQ Salesforce Live. I'm going to touch on kind of how the live aspect works also. Okay. So let's get you to see the tool, right? Kind of talked enough about a lot of various aspects, right? And I know I'm kind of trying to jam everything in within within this short 30 minutes. So, hopefully I didn't lose you. Also, if you're looking at my screen, so just a very quick confirmation, Harry, I just switched over to my browser. You can still see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see it great.
All right, excellent.
Yep.
So what you see on the left is something that kind of I was talking about, right? It's called the universe in ACCELQ, right? So it's an example of a sales cloud universe, right? But what ACCELQ has done is kind of pre-created a lot of these universes working hand in hand with Salesforce themselves, right? So we have a sales cloud, we have a service cloud, we have community, financial services, healthcare cloud, and you pick any industry vertical. The biggest Fortune 10 customer is already ACCELQ's reference customer. I know it's a pretty tall statement, but that's kind of the level of impact we've made working with Salesforce in terms of helping customers achieve that DevOps, right? And automated testing in that journey, right? So the way this universe really works is what you see on the left is kind of like a blueprint of the application itself, right? So the blue dots represents different pages of the Salesforce Sales Cloud in this case, right? And these lines which are going across these pages represents different end user actions. So the way ACCELQ has kind of taken a unique approach to this is it's not a script-based automation, right? So if you think about it, in a low-code, no-code world, and what you're really testing should not be kind of a repository of scripts which you really don't have any visibility into how it relates to your user stories, requirements, your business processes, right? At the end of the day, you can only make a smart release testing plan if you exactly know what business processes are being automated, right? And that's kind of exactly how ACCELQ goes about it. In fact, if I click on one of the business processes, you'll see the universe filters down, right? It actually shows me what are the pages which are being touched with that business process, right? So at the end of the day, all your test assets, so to say, right, all your regression suites are nothing but a visual representation of an application flow diagram, right? And the way we kind of approach this, at the end of the day, if you really think about it, automation's nothing new, right? And just doing a different way of how to automate is not the answer. The real answer in automation and the real kind of efficiency in automation is how can it be robust? How can it be scalable? So this approach, what it really enables, if you have to take one thing away from this session, apart from obviously codeless approach to automation, is your first test is going to maybe take you an hour to build, but by the time you're on your 10th, it's going to take you 1/10 the time. And by the time you've done 1,000 or 1,500 tests that covers the span of your implementation, you're going to significantly reduce on the maintenance, and your development is going to become easier and easier. So it's a design first approach to automation, which basically produces robust and sustainable automation, which can go release to release as well as scale up as you really speed up your release velocity, right? So that's one of the core things I really want you all to kind of take away from this presentation, right? That as you evaluate codeless automation tools in the market, right, you're going to find a handful of them, right? But definitely keep that core aspect in your evaluation, right? That how can I find something which is robust and sustainable? I don't want something which just gives me a dump of a recording. That's been done in the last 20 years, but that has been proven not to scale up, right? And if I kind of go into the next level detail, let's pick a test, a business flow, right? So if I pick a business flow, for instance, lightning, creating a lead and account, right? You'll see kind of, from the universe, I get to this view where it kind of shows me the complete flow. If I go into one of the steps, for instance, perform login, right? It basically is part of that universe, right? And the way automation really works is you basically right click on, on your screens, and you basically just record your automation, but then it's complemented by this natural language editor, right? And this natural language editor is apart from obviously being AI powered, it's pretty intuitive, right? So what I mean by that is you don't really need to know what you're typing. It's autocomplete based. It kind of has the IntelliSense, right? Similar to when you search on Google. So when you search on Google, you really don't need to know exactly what you're searching here, right? You kind of just start typing a phrase. For instance, I want to press a button, right? So I just start typing press, right? And it's IntelliSense based. So it kind of tells you that, hey, is this something, are you trying to click something, right? Let's suppose, in my application, I have a PDF file that gets generated. Now I just start typing PDF and it tells me, hey, you know what? I can do all of these things. Do you want to validate a content of PDF? Do you want to validate a format, right? Let's suppose my Salesforce app sends an email and I really need to get into an email notification and I need to validate the content of that email. Because if you think about it, an automated test scenario is not just automation of a business process. It's also automation of a verification against an expected outcome, right? What that means is you should have the flexibility in your automation to be very easily put in assertions and verifications, right? So, I just start typing verify, I get ton of verifications and assertions, right? Let's suppose I had something more complex as part of this flow, after creating a lead, I needed to make an API call here, right? And I needed to basically test it, right? So I can just click on an API. And again, without writing a single line of code, I can pretty much, bring up, a complete REST-based flow where I can put in my assertions. I just start typing database. I can execute a database query and compare the content of my screens, right, of my UI screens, right, to a database value and so on, right? And obviously data driven, and it can be kind of initiated through multiple areas in terms of execution, and so on, right? So I just want to be a little cognizant of time. So before we jump to questions, I'll quickly showcase one more aspect, right? So the universe also kind of comes in handy, not just for test automation design creation, right? But it also comes in really handy for slicing and dicing the universe and creating my test plans. For instance, I'm tracking my user stories for my next sprint or my next release, right? In Jira, right? So I can hook up Jira pretty much in a live manner, right? And then I can look at kind of, what are my user stories that can go live in the next sprint? It's going to come back and tell me you're only going to achieve 40%, 80% coverage. So it does coverage analysis on your requirements. I can actually jump to Jira right from here, right? If I log into my Jira, see right here, it actually tells me which ACCELQ tests are covering that Jira user story. So as a Scrum Master or a project manager, I can clearly see kind of, what is being covered, right? As well as I have, associated defects. I can do trend analysis, whether it will help me make a good decision in terms of whether I'm really ready for my go live. I can see in the last N number of runs, N number of days, last 10 executions, what have you, right? I can do some perspectives in terms of what my high priority failures is. I can quickly jump to a suite, right? Let's suppose I want to see in the last execution what failed. I see 2 failed. I jump to the failure. I see kind of a mini movie of the complete kind of execution that was recorded. I jump to the failed screen. And if I feel, hey, you know what, this doesn't seem right, it seems like a failure, I can create a bug right from here in Jira, right? And see, it actually tells me which tests failed. And now my developer exactly knows how to recreate it, including the screenshot associated for that bug, right? So it kind of has a lifecycle automation approach to it, right? To kind of manage your test planning and suites and change management, right? If a page changes, it can quickly come back and tell you that here's the change in the page and what you should be testing, right? So that kind of gives you an ability to really have basically your release testing be at the same speed as your kind of, other process areas to really achieve that, end-to-end automation, right? So with that, I know it was kind of like a drinking from a fire hose. So Haley, I'll give, jump back to you and see if there are a couple quick questions we can address within the time.
Yes, awesome. Great presentation and good job fitting it in the time we had. Great, thank you. So we do have a couple questions. I'm going to hop right into those before we close out the webinar. The first one's, does ACCELQ support custom objects and Lightning Web Components?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've actually worked with Salesforce's own engineering team, and not just supporting custom objects and Lightning Web Components. Salesforce is also helping us stay ahead of its releases. So we don't even have to wait until early sandbox review to make sure things are supported. While Salesforce's story comes to life for their upcoming release, we have worked out a way where we can keep up with those changes also. So not just the support, but even ongoing live support for those objects.
Okay, awesome. Can the Salesforce mobile apps on Android and iOS be automated?
Yes, absolutely. So say ACCELQ has a mobile component to it, and it's completely iOS agnostic. In fact, the same scenario can be run across an Android and an iOS app of Salesforce seamlessly. So that means you don't need to maintain two scripts. Object identification also works across both. So the same scenario, the same use case you saw can be run across two devices. So it seamlessly supports that. And that's also completely AI powered and codeless. You don't need any APM setup, any lines of code for doing mobile test automation in ACCELQ.
All right, and then we actually had a few questions on integrations. People are wondering if ACCELQ integrates with Azure DevOps or Agile Accelerator, Salesforce Agile Accelerator. Can you talk a little bit about integrations?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the integrations I showed was Jira, right? Exact same to your question, Azure DevOps integration works exactly seamlessly. And see, when I click run on this test scenario, it asks me when to run, and you can link it to your CI job. So whether it be DevOps pipeline or whether it be FlowSim, right? It works seamlessly, kind of initiating this regression suite from a CI/CD pipeline. So it has three levels of integration: your requirements traceability to do coverage analysis, your defect tracking, as well as initiation from your CI/CD tools.